Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Digital Growth Live. I'm Emily Lopez, a digital marketing strategist, and today we are in for a treat. I'm so excited for our guest today, Crystal. Oh, I messed up your name already.
Don't worry, everybody does.
How do you say your name so I don't butcher it?
Yeah, Crystalline. It's a mouthful. Crystalline
Yes.
Randazzo. Yeah.
Crystalline Randazzo.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm super excited to have her today. And again, Digital Growth Live is my passion project, is where I am interviewing 100 women entrepreneurs in all different industries to really just showcase what all these amazing women are doing, and also an opportunity for us to support each other. So we're really creating a network of women. We're doing extraordinary things in this world, and want to just take time to celebrate them. So today, like I said, we have Crystalline on the line, and we're going to talk to her about her business, which I'm super excited because as a digital marketing strategist, she talks about developing your story. And I feel that is so crucial for marketing. And that's really what a lot of people jump over. They just go into strategy. Me, myself included, sometimes I do that. But I think it's so important to really understand your story, your message, who you are, how to craft that. And that is a skill. So that's why we have this amazing expert on the line to teach us and talk to us and give us some tricks and tips on that skill. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Emily. I'm so excited to be here. There's nothing I like more than talking about storytelling.
Awesome. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so I run a business. I started out my life as a photographer, became a filmmaker, and spent 12 plus years creating media and telling stories for humanitarian organizations. That led me to sort of a question, I feel like, is why are we making this media? Sometimes we'd be making this beautiful piece and it would be really beautiful, but it wouldn't land or it wouldn't motivate people to action. And somewhere around, I think it was around 2013 or 2014, I decided that I had to better understand the stories we were telling. And I became very fascinated with how we tell stories. And slowly my business has moved away from humanitarian filmmaking and photography and more into change-making entrepreneurs, especially women or female identifying entrepreneurs who have a story to tell, but have maybe not been able to tell it in the way that they want to tell it, or to speak about the work and the way they want to change the world. And I believe stories are the great connector. That is how we build connection with other people. And the science behind storytelling also backs that up. And that's what I teach. I teach both the science and a deeply internal process of how we excavate our stories and share them with the world when we're ready, of course.
Awesome. Yeah. And like one of the things I do right now is I'm working with women entrepreneurs, getting them comfortable on lives. I'm getting them comfortable doing videos. And I think one of the key things for them, a lot when they're shy and they're not sure how to show up online, is that they don't really truly understand their story and they don't feel like their story matters. And one of the conversations we had before, which I really loved, is like every story matters, right? And I truly believe that, and you truly believe that. So what are some tips that you would give to people who are like really reserved and like a little nervous to jump on and create content, whether it's digital, whether it's videos or written, about how to tell their stories?
Yeah, this is, there's so much I could talk about here, so I want to sort of pull it out. I think many women feel like their story isn't big enough or important enough to share. But what we know about stories is it's not always the big stories that make us relate and connect to someone else. In fact, we only really need 3 things in a story to build what we call narrative transportation and storytelling language. And that means we travel with them and we connect with them. And those 3 things are, we just need to feel commonality with the person telling the story. We need to feel empathy with them. And then there needs to be a little bit of visual language. And so my best tip for people who feel like I only have small stories to tell or nothing big has happened to me yet, and these are very common barriers that come up, especially for the women that I work with, is that it is not the big story that necessarily connects someone to you. It's somebody who can feel your emotions when you tell a story. When you feel your emotions, someone else feels your emotions. And so sometimes a little story from your life can actually build more connection than a big story that someone can't relate to.
Mm, I love that. So little stories that matter, right? And I think too, starting out from kind of a coaching perspective, it's starting out with those little stories. Well, and when I work with my clients, it's asking questions. Well, like, tell me a little bit about this. Tell me a little bit about this. And when they start to speak about it, then they really start to expand about it, right? And then that gives them permission to start telling more of their little stories. So I think it's about getting comfortable of speaking that.
And truly reflecting on what those stories are. Most of us have come to our work, if we're change making entrepreneurs in any capacity, because of some little, strum of our heartstrings. There is always a story there. Like, it can be a big smart story or a small story, but there's always a story about how we came to the work or how our work pivoted, right? Like, I wanted to be a photographer. I thought I was going to be a photographer, forever. That's all I wanted to be when I was 18, like, I just want to shoot some photos and make something beautiful. But as time went on, I found that what is the point of making something beautiful if nobody else gets it, or it's not getting into the hands of the right people, or it doesn't make any changes in the world? Like, there's so much more than just taking a photograph, right? There's this connection that we're looking to build with other people through our work. Most of us aren't just there to grind it out in the mastery of the craft. Or once we master it, we want to do more. We want to do more with the work. And so I think using our stories in that way is a great way to motivate others to come along with us on our missions.
Yeah. And we talked about this before, but from a marketing perspective, I think storytelling is so key. So where do you find that storytelling really fits in from a marketing perspective? And if that's too general of a question, we could dig into that more.
Yeah, well, I'll try to answer, and then if we need to go deeper,
Okay.
we can. So for me, I think it's about authenticity. What we know about storytelling is that when somebody tells a relatable story, their audience's brain actually releases oxytocin. And when oxytocin is released, it's considered the love hormone or the trust hormone. And what that does to your audience is it makes them feel connected to you. It makes them feel that you are trustworthy, you're approachable. These are all things that we really want our audience to feel about it. This isn't like a marketing scheme. I don't see it as a marketing scheme. It's an authentic trust building process that you can build into your work, right? You're a real person with real emotions and true vulnerabilities. It's not sort of just like, I had to make this marketing campaign and push out 18 Instagram posts. It's like, here I am as a person.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think it goes across all industries and sectors. Like right now, from a entrepreneur standpoint, I'm working a lot with solo entrepreneurs, and they're either coaches, but I'm also seeing authenticity like really doing well in the technology field that I work with, and with my clients in my 9 to 5 world. Right, I have some of my coworkers who are creating amazing videos, being authentically who they are, and talking also about technology, right? They're leading with their hobbies, they're leading with their interests, and then they're tying technology into that, and it's still doing like phenomenal. So I think people are really resonating with authenticity, right? I think there's just so much messaging out there. That if you don't have that authenticity, you're missing that connection. And I know you talked about connection earlier. I think you said that like there's 3 pieces of telling the story, and connection was one. So it's really powerful.
It is. It's so powerful. And there's so much content out there, right? People aren't looking just for content. They are maybe more now than ever. If we think of, COVID and how disconnected we all feel or have felt in the time frame, we are all looking for connection, and it's very human. It's part of our survival as, is to connect with other people. So we're not just looking for a product. We're looking for people that we can connect with who understand us and we feel like are relatable. And stories are the quickest way to build that kind of connection. That's what I believe, anyways.
Yeah. Is there like a certain length of a story? I mean, that's usually like a sweet spot. Like, how do you tell your story? Like, is there like I'm just trying to think of like a time
Yeah.
range, or
Yeah.
it just depends on like the vessel and where you're doing it. I'm s-
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm going to answer you as a filmmaker, a media maker, but also with sort of different elements of storytelling in the back of my mind. But we know that shorter is better when you're in a social media environment, right? If you could keep it under a minute and a half, that's really ideal because people don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
But I actually think what's more important than length, which a lot of people focus on the length, is the first 2.8 seconds of any story that you tell.
Mm.
So many times we're so influenced by theater, the cinema, we want to put these beautiful intros in our logo in our first few seconds of our video, and we lose everybody there. The first 2.8 seconds of whatever you make, especially a video, you really want to make sure that you give them your audience something that they need, an answer to a question they have, or a piece of connection that's going to connect them to you. That first few seconds, I think, are more important than the actual overall length, because that is when they decide whether they will stay or when they will go. And it doesn't matter how amazing your media is if people go.
That is an awesome tip. I love that. Now I'm going to look at like my videos and everything else and that what am I doing in those first couple of seconds? Because it's really true, right? If you're not capturing your audience because there's so much content out there, they're like, all right, next. And I do it too.
Yeah.
I'm like, next, next,
And
next.
that's one of the things I teach. It's not enough for the content to be good. The restructuring and reordering of the content is very, very important, because here's something that we all do as storytellers. Humans are all storytellers. We're all telling stories in some capacity. We include parts of a story that are relevant to us and not relevant to our audience. And we exclude very important pieces of information that our audience needs to understand the narrative and don't in our stories. And so what's very important is that we tell the story, and most of us are going to do that in chronological order, but then we reorder the story for the interest of the audience and not for ourselves, which is very difficult to do. It's pretty
I was,
hard to edit our own stuff.
yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions because I'm just curious,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, with that, thinking about like what is your audience, what is going to like most impact your audience, what is going to give them what they're really looking for? Usually when I tell a story, I'm like, you always start with I. So
Yeah.
how do you like re-swizzle that to start with what they need, dabble in a little bit with who you are, your product or service, whatever, and then kind of put in a nice little package?
Yeah, my recommendation for that is, first, you have to know who your audience is. And so many of us are like, I'm telling stories for the world, and it's like, no, we got to know who we're talking to, because that is how we niche down what stories to tell, because we all have thousands of stories to tell, and
Yeah.
not all of them are relevant to our audience. So first, we know who we're talking to. Secondly, we have what is called a conflict moment in the story. And you should technically have lots of little conflict moments, because that's what keeps people on the edge of their seat. And that's how they decide if they're going to stay in your story or whether they're going to go, get their coffee in that moment. So what we do is we make sure we're telling a story where the conflict is relatable to the audience. So if you've had an experience as a coach, say, where you felt alone and you felt misunderstood or burned out, that is a piece of conflict that your audience can relate to. And if you're telling a story and sharing your real emotions, which is very important, because sometimes we get very much like, I'm a business professional and I must sell my qualifications and not share my authentic self. So we have to make sure there's some real authentic emotion.
I like when you're telling the story, it's like this, because that's how it feels when you're
Like,
in that space. I get
let
it.
me tell you these facts, right? And it's like, humans don't care about facts. They're actually mirroring the emotion. So we need to let our real selves come out of hiding and share those, tender, gooey places inside. And then right at the end of the story, you have your conflict, you have a little resolution. They have this moment, which I call the jab. And that is not about you at all and not about your story at all. It is about your audience and what they need and how you can help them what they need. And that's how we package a story, right? It's not just about the story you're telling. It's about how that story relates to the people you most want to reach. And we can miss that when we're so focused on ourselves. Storytelling seems like an internal process, and it is. I always say it's internal first, and then we turn it externally. Every story is edited to the audience, or else we run the risk that the story doesn't land.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I try to remind my clients all the time, right? When you're creating content strategy, you're putting out all this information, but how does it relate to your audience? Like, what's the next step that what's the next nugget that you're giving them that's going to help them, right? Not just like, okay, this is what we have, speeds and feeds, and that's it, because that doesn't resonate.
Yeah,
So,
it's so right. Exactly right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I love everything that you're saying. If people wanted to work with you, how do they get in contact with you? Do you have any like new programs or opportunities to work with you coming down the pipe? Tell us, tell us.
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's my name, so it's www.crystallinerandazzo. I know that's a mouthful, but it is here on the screen.com. I run quarterly story circles, so that's probably the easiest way to kind of dip your toe in if you're interested in storytelling, but you can I do a little story lesson, and certain people can share their stories in that space if they want to learn to practice, because one of the things I believe is that storytelling is not just a skill, it's a practice. And the only way we get better at it is by doing it. And so few of us as entrepreneurs actually give ourselves opportunities to share our stories. So we need practice at it. So storytelling circles. And then about twice a year, I do a whole program, like a group program. And I'm not going to probably be offering that until somewhere around the fall, because I'm about to move to Italy. I'm in the process of a big transition, which is awesome, but, sort of pushed my timeline back. So I think sometime around September, I'll be offering that group program. And I do one-on-one story coaching, where I actually do some virtual training and then one-on-one with people who want to just get straight to the story. And, they're like, I need this story archive. I want 3 or 4 stories that I could use for my business at any moment. And I do that as well. And that's usually about a 6-week program that I do one-on-one coaching with people. And it tends to be really fun because people really leave seeing their business differently than when we came in, because they excavated some of those stories that they've always known but never thought to tell to their audience.
Awesome. That sounds really interesting. Like, I've never thought about doing that for myself, but I'm like, oh yeah, I need to work with her. I think too, a lot of like entrepreneurs, if they're doing TEDx talks and stuff like that, I'm sure they would gravitate to her too, because that's all about telling a story and capturing an audience, but also leaving them with that like thought-provoking information.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we all have so many stories to tell, but we need a good editor. And I also think we need the science. That's why I love the science of storytelling so much,
Yeah.
is because there are ways to make a story stickier. So, it becomes less about us and more about this experience we're creating. And storytelling is so powerful. It's so much fun. So I think, there's nothing more interesting than somebody being able to see themselves differently when they start to tell their stories. And that's what happens, is they actually don't look at themselves the same, because the story we tell ourselves is everything. And when we understand our stories for ourselves, we can tell them to others, but we actually think, believe, and act differently when we tell those stories. So it's so fun. Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
I mean, I could go down a rat hole on that one. You can unpack so many different things, right? From that experience. And there are stories that we're telling ourselves all the time, because I'm big into mindset, right? So
Yeah.
you can start to unpack the stories that don't work for you.
Absolutely.
And change the narrative, right? Because we are the creator. We create everything that we put out to the universe. At least that's what I believe. So the stories that we're telling ourselves sometimes no longer exist. So you can unpack that and create that story in a more powerful, impactful way for you.
Absolutely. We can tell ourselves very disempowering stories,
Yeah.
and we don't even recognize the impact that those stories are having on our day-to-day life. And what I see over and over again working with women, when we start to, I always say, it's not that they're untrue, they're partial. Because we can never tell the whole truth of any story, because our little human brains can only take in so many pieces of information per second. And most of that is unconscious information, so we're only processing a little bit of conscious information. And what that means is that all of our stories are in part untrue and true, right? We have pieces of truth and pieces that we missed. So we can always rebuild them. We can reconstruct them. It's simply building blocks. And when we begin to rebuild them in a way that actually serves us and helps us to see ourselves in the way that we truly want to be and who we are, I think I always say it's more of who we've always been, because these stories come from our past and they help us understand, oh, I've always cared about this. I just didn't put it into words and articulate it. So it's so empowering. Storytelling is so empowering. So I'm always like, it's not just, it is marketing, but it's everything. It's all of our parts of ourselves that we get to enhance and analyze through storytelling.
Yeah, beautiful. So, any last like piece of information or thoughts that you want to share to the audience about storytelling? Because I like to make sure that I get everything you want to say and then jump into pleasure next.
Yeah, I think for me, oh, that's my coffee maker. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm like, hold on.
The story will go to the coffee.
Right. It's like, meh, meh. Can you tell I'm an addict? I'm like, oh, let it finish off here. So sorry. So I just think, like, right now storytelling is all the rage. There's suddenly it's become very sexy. I'm like, man, I'm before my time, This is like suddenly very sexy. But I think really the piece is just that we have to be in touch with our own selves and our own desires and our own joy in order to tell our true stories. And I think so often what happens when we start talking about stories is people immediately sort of switch over to the analytical side of their brain, and they're like, I am qualified. I have this certification and I've done this and I've done this and this. And their whole story turns into them trying to convince somebody else that they're actually qualified. And to me, that's just qualifications. That is not a true story that builds connection. And I wish that all of us actually could like let go of trying to prove ourselves and just step more into our power and what we're naturally good at and tell those stories from that place in our heart. Yeah.
Big heart for that one.
Yeah, yay.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm an optimist.
Yeah,
So
me too.
That's like, and that's why we get along so well together. Yeah. But I do like that's my hope for the world, right? That's like my hope too for Digital Growth Live, is that it helps people tap into their core and their like true authenticity and who they are, to really like showcase like the gifts that we were brought into this world with, to showcase to others, right?
Yeah.
So
Beautiful. I love that. I love that so much. I love what you're doing. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. So part of me is like, we talk about business and how you're jamming and making a difference in the world and have all these great offerings. And then I also like to talk a little bit about like self-care, love, and pleasure, right? Because I think for women entrepreneurs, especially if you're like a solo entrepreneur or have maybe one or two people underneath you, things can get really hectic. Things can get really crazy. And then you just... yeah, you lose the excitement of what you're doing. So how do you keep your life exciting? I know you're traveling to Italy, so there'll be a lot of gelato and good eating. That's me like thinking about when I went to Italy. But like, how do you keep yourself like really centered and like in a really radiant place? Because you talked about that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story.
Yeah, I should have asked you to start off with a story.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of 2018, I was really burned out. I was just so burned out. I'd been doing humanitarian storytelling work. I had been working as an advocate for humanitarian storytellers and also for participatory practice in storytelling, which is more like give people control over their stories as opposed to taking their stories and editing them and putting them out in the world without their say. But I just felt so drained. I felt like I couldn't make another thing. It's like I dumped out all of my creativity cup. And I basically took a whole month of work off. I cleared my schedule in January and I went to Florence, Italy, where the only thing I had signed up for was an art class, which I would do every morning. And it was the only time I think in my adult life since I got married where I never had to think about another person. I didn't have to think about the groceries. I didn't have to like, what are we going to eat? Or, what is our schedule and what client do I have to deal with? And I just wondered. I went to the museum almost every morning and sat with a piece of art. I'm like, today is Botticelli's day. I'm going to go, suck in some Botticelli energy, and then I'll go to my art class. And then I ate a lot of gelato and I ate a lot of pasta. And I felt so sparkly. I felt like I had felt when I was a little girl. Like no responsibility, just beauty and eating what I want and not thinking about it and not counting a calorie and walking and taking my camera in the morning and photographing. And I realized that so often in our lives, we empty that cup for other people, but that we can't keep going on. We can't keep creating. At least what we create, I think, is severely impacted when we don't fill that cup. And, there's always that story of, you got to put on your oxygen mask before you help other people. But I think even more than that, I believe that rest is radical. That we as women have been taught to overextend, maybe as Western society, not even women, have taught that the best way to be successful is to overextend. But in truth, how do we have space for creativity? Because we know that the brain is always processing, but it sometimes needs downtime to process. Things are happening in the background. But what if we never give our brain time for that because we're always on our phone and we're always on a computer and we're on our next Zoom call? And what that means, I think, as creative people, as anybody who's making anything, I should say, person, thing, project, is that we have to make space in our life for those things or else they never happen. So for me, joy, pleasure requires space. And that is one thing we have a tremendous shortage of in this world, in our lives.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for telling that story. And I connected with it, almost started crying, because when you said sparkle and giving yourself time and space, it was just like, yes, yes. And when you said radical, rest is radical, I mean, I totally was like, yes, 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 yes.
It's
So
radical. We need it.
it's so crazy that rest is radical, but it really, really is at this point. Wow. Beautiful storytelling. So thank you so much for coming on to Digital Growth Live, telling us about storytelling and how you can implement that into your business, but also showcasing your beautiful skills and really how you connect with an audience, and share authentically with who you are and what you bring to the world. So
Thank you for having me. I
yes.
love it. I'm just so happy we've connected. And I think the work you're doing in the world is beautiful. And what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Crystalline Randazzo, go to her website. I will drop the link to her website also in the information below. Keep on watching Digital Growth Live. Make sure you share this so more women and more people can really see what these women are up to in this world and what we're creating. And so you could sparkle a little bit more in this world.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sparkle it up.
Sparkle it up. I love it. So thank you again. Have a fabulous day. And to my audience, I will see you the next time. Bye.